Hi everyone, welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, season 2, episode 4. I've had a great week so far. It was mom's weekend at my sorority, so I finally got to spend some time with my mom after not seeing her for a while. I also got to go to the Harry Potter live orchestra concert, and it was so much fun. I was kind of sad that I wasn't able to go to the canceled podcast live show. They were here in Austin, but hopefully the next time they're here I can go, so I'm trying not to think about it. Aside from that, I just wanted to say thank you all again for all the amazing support you guys have given me. I always look forward to making episodes even when I come home and I'm exhausted from school. It's all I can think about. So thank you so much for your support, and let's get into today's episode. Today we're going to be talking about the Israel Keyes case, and just a quick disclaimer, this one is very disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Israel Keyes was born in Richmond, Utah in 1978 to Heidi and John Jeffrey Keyes. His parents were both from California, and he was the second-born child in his family of 10. His parents were against the government, public schooling, and modern medicine. His parents decided to leave Mormonism and moved to Colville, Washington, where they became fundamentalist Christians and joined a white supremacist church called the Ark. They continued raising their kids in a cabin located in the woods. There was no running water or electricity. As Keyes got older, he began to engage in satanic behavior. He would set fires, steal guns from his neighbors, shoot at random houses, and break into homes at just 12 years old. These actions soon escalated to Keyes torturing and shooting animals. He even went as far as killing their family cat. He tied it to a tree and shot it with a .22 revolver. He would also later confess to gutting a deer while it was still alive. He would say he was up for torturing anything with a heartbeat. I don't even want to think about how many other animals he's potentially killed. Towards the late 1990s, they moved to Maupin, Oregon. This would be where Keyes attacked his first victim. It is not known what her name is, but Keyes would say it was something along the lines of Lena or Leia. Between 1996 and 1998, he abducted a girl between the age of 14 and 18 years old. She was tubing with her friends in the late afternoon on the Deschutes River when he abducted her and then tied her up with ropes near a campground bathroom where he raped her. He claims that after he let her go, she went back to her friends, but because this was never reported, we aren't sure if this is really the case. He did admit that he had knives on him and was planning on strangling her and dumping her body in the toilet pit after performing a satanic ritual. He also told investigators that she was really scared and kept telling him that she wouldn't tell anyone. He told her to shut up, but she would continue to tell him that she wouldn't say anything if he just let her go. He then said that she was pretty smart and that her tactic worked. If she would have tried to fight him off, he said he would have gotten violent. Quote, "I was too timid. I wasn't violent enough, but I made up my mind that I would never let that happen again." Keyes would admit that after committing a crime near his home, he would never do it again. In fact, he established a quote-unquote unwritten rule. This rule meant that he would always kill away from his home and travel long distances in order to do so. He loved to travel, and during this time, he would look for areas to abduct people and dispose of them. These areas included hiking trails, campgrounds, hidden and quiet areas, etc. Keyes decided he wanted to tell his parents that he didn't share their belief anymore, and after doing so, he was forced to move out. His parents also told his siblings that they weren't allowed to have any type of relationship with him. On July 9th, 1998, he moved to New York because he enlisted in the U.S. Army. He served as a specialist in the Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry Regiment before passing a rigorous U.S. Army Rangers training course. Throughout his time in the military, he was stationed at Fort Hood in Texas, Fort Lewis in Washington, and Sinai in Egypt. While in Egypt, he and his friends patronized prostitutes in Tel Aviv. You may be wondering if during this time he committed any crimes, and there haven't been any reports of violence, but according to a fellow soldier, Keyes did say that he wanted to kill him. While he was stationed in Fort Lewis, Washington, he drank heavily and was very antisocial. During this time, he also served on a mortar team in the 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, 25th Infantry Division, and in February of 2001, he got a DUI, meaning he was driving under the influence of alcohol. Later, he received an Army Achievement Medal for his service as both a gunner and assistant gunner. After receiving these awards, he was honorably discharged and settled on the Maca Reservation of Nia Bay, Washington. During his time on the Washington Maca Reservation, he met a woman and got her pregnant. He worked in the Parks and Recreation Department for the Tribal Authority. This is very eerie to me because it'd be hard to notice someone in these areas. What if he committed crimes way sooner than he's willing to admit? He got to spend lots of time in the forests and mountains. As mentioned earlier, he often made long trips to eastern Washington. If you remember, this is where he spent most of his childhood. This is when he discovered he wanted to be an atheist and begin killing people. This is also when he decided to start his own construction company called Keys Construction. He worked as a handyman, contractor, and construction worker. Could you imagine hiring a handyman only to find out later what horrific crimes he committed? Keys also admitted to his first murder, stating it occurred in July of 2001. The FBI doesn't have the identity or location of the victim, only his words. He would also admit to another murder between July of 2001 and 2005. He told police that he killed an unidentified couple in Washington state. He wouldn't confirm if they were a married couple or just together at the time. Police are also not aware of if these people were tourists or residents of Washington. Keys would tell police that they were both buried near a valley. The FBI believes that he probably drove their vehicle far away from the crime scene in order to confuse authorities. This is a common tactic used to throw off police into thinking that either a murder-suicide occurred, the couple simply ran away, or even just vanished into thin air. He then admitted to committing 2 more murders during the summer and fall months of 2005 and 2006. While the identity of these people are also unknown, he told police that he was able to get rid of their bodies with his boat. He said that he used anchors to weigh down their bodies and keep them in the water. Keys said that one of them is in the Crescent Lake in Washington, and just like the previous murder, he moved their cars far away from the crime scene. Keys then got up and moved to Anchorage, Alaska with his daughter on March 9, 2007 after breaking up with her mom. He soon began dating a new woman and stayed in Anchorage for over a year before deciding to travel again in October of 2008. While he hasn't confessed to any criminal activity during this time period, the FBI is still looking into his activity during this trip. So far, we know that he rented a PT Cruiser in Seattle following his trips in Arizona and South Dakota. We also know that he caught a flight to Boston from Seattle. Keys admitted to another murder and stated on April 9, 2009, he abducted a woman from a state along the East Coast and killed her. He then disposed of her body somewhere in upstate New York. It's worth noting that he owned a property in Constable, New York, but police didn't think the victim was buried there. The following day, he also admitted to robbing a bank in Tupper Lake, New York. After the robbery, he claims he spent hours at a nearby campground, which we know is bad news considering we know he assaulted a woman at a campground previously. The FBI knows of a trip he took on July 9th to July 12th of 2010. During this time, he flew from Anchorage to Sacramento, California. When he got there, he rented a black Ford Focus and used it to travel 280 miles over the course of 3 days. He also went to Auburn, California, but this is all the FBI currently knows about this trip and is actively seeking new information in order to potentially link him to other crimes. Shortly after, in April or May of 2011, a couple near Point Warrenzoff almost became victims of Keys' violent reign. He targeted them, but a police officer arrived at the location and this forced him to cancel his plans. This angered him and he actually planned on killing the police officer for ruining his plans, but another officer arrived shortly after. Keys also told the FBI that he planned on abducting another victim in May of 2011. He waited at the North Fork trailhead in Eagle River. He prepared the crime scene with Drano and a shovel in order to dispose of the body. He didn't say why he didn't go along with his plans, but you'll see that making toolkits to prepare for murders was very common in this case. Now we're going to discuss his next confession, but this time the victims are identified as Bill and Lorraine Currier. This occurred just a month later in June of 2011. Keys traveled to Chicago from Anchorage and then rented a vehicle and drove to Essex, Vermont. He then came across Bill and Lorraine's home. He chose to kill these people based on the design of their home, by the way. The couple lived in a house that had an attached garage, making forced entry easy. He then cut their phone lines before bursting into their room while they were sleeping and made them put their house shoes on before walking them to their car. The slippers were used to walk across the broken glass. He then drove them to an abandoned farmhouse in their own vehicle. During his interrogation, he calmly told the investigators that he bound the woman and bludgeoned her husband in the basement. While he was doing so, the man called out, "Where's my wife?" but Keyes shot him right after. He would admit to smoking a cigar in the backyard in the middle of the crime. Keyes would say the woman was feisty and tried to fight him, but he got a hold of her and sexually assaulted her before strangling her to death. He then poured Drano on their bodies and placed them into trash bags. He disposed of the murder weapon nearby, and the FBI was actually able to recover it later. Unfortunately, their bodies were never found. His next murder was on February 1st of 2012. Samantha Koenig was working at a Common Grounds coffee kiosk when Keyes can be seen on surveillance footage ordering a coffee wearing a ski mask. She made his order and handed it to him. He then pointed a gun at her and demanded her to turn off the lights before entering and forcing her out of it. He demanded her to turn off the lights so that he wouldn't be seen. I'm going to link the footage in the show notes along with all of the other evidence so that you can see this for yourself. She tried to run away, but he quickly tackled her and told her he would kill her if she tried anything else. He then kept her quiet by telling her the gun he had quiet ammo and that it would be easy to kill her. He then tied her up and put her in his truck and removed his license plate. He told her that he was kidnapping her for ransom so that she'd think she'd return home, but she kept telling him that her family didn't have much money. This wasn't enough to convince him, as he told her the public would help them. He kept her alive for several hours and even went back to the coffee shop in order to retrieve her phone. Once he got the phone, he texted her boyfriend that was supposed to pick her up from her shift and said, "Hey, I'm spending a couple days with friends, let my dad know." Keyes also texted the owner of the Common Grounds coffee kiosk saying that she had a bad day and was leaving town before taking the battery out of the phone. He then took her to his shed and tied her up once more. He also turned up his radio so none of her cries for help could be heard and told her that he had a police scanner and it would alert him if she went to the neighbors and asked for help. He then demanded that she give him her address and PIN, to which Keyes actually headed towards her boyfriend's truck in order to get her ATM card. She explained to him that she shared a bank account with her boyfriend and that it was located in his truck. This is absolutely insane to me, but it only gets crazier. While Keyes was stealing the card, her boyfriend actually confronted and yelled at him. He assumed that he was just some random burglar, but was on edge because of the message he received and the fact that Samantha wasn't at work. He ran inside to get help, but unfortunately, Keyes had already fled. He went to the nearest ATM to make sure the PIN Samantha had given him was correct and returned home. When he made it back home, he poured himself a glass of wine and raped Samantha. He then strangled her to death. After doing so, he went back inside his home, woke his daughter up for school, and began packing for a cruise in New Orleans he had previously planned. He left on February 2nd for his cruise. Keyes got back home on February 17th, 2012. He decided it was time to begin the ransom by writing a note stating he demanded the money be put into Samantha's bank account. He then went back to his shed and grabbed her lifeless body. He tried to make it seem as if she was still alive before taking a Polaroid photo of her tied up by applying makeup to her face and sewing her eyes open. In this photo, you can see his arm holding up the Anchorage Daily News from February 13th, 2012. He then copied the photo and used a manual typewriter in order to demand $30,000. I'm now going to play audio of her father asking the public for help.
Please help find my daughter.
Samantha's father, James Koenig, went public.
I don't know if my daughter's being fed, taken care of, if she's still alive, if she's getting any sleep.
As time went on, there was a tremendous amount of fear about what happened and who was in our community that could do something like this.
Strangely, he then texted her boyfriend to look in Connors Park under a picture of Albert. He then said, "Ain't she pretty?" He placed the note in Connors Bog Park under a memorial flyer for a dog named Albert. This note was discovered by police. Keyes then dismembered her body and headed to Lake Matanuska, where he cut holes in the ice and placed her body in the lake. During this time, Samantha's family had actually gathered money from the community and her father deposited it in her bank account. By doing this, authorities hoped to catch Keyes by waiting for ATM withdrawals to be made. Withdrawals were made in Anchorage, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. This helped police figure out what vehicle Keyes was driving. At the time, it was a white Ford Focus. Interestingly enough, Corporal Brian Henry of the Texas Highway Patrol and Texas Ranger Steve Rayburn decided to pull over a white Ford Focus that matched the description during a traffic stop. Luckily, during this stop, they searched his vehicle and were able to obtain Samantha's phone and ATM card. Her ATM card was found in his wallet. He was quickly arrested and told police he would tell them anything they needed to know as long as they didn't put it online, as he didn't want his daughter to read about what he had done. He told the police, "I'll tell you everything you want to know. I'll give it blow by blow if you want. I have lots more stories to tell. This is interesting to me because he murdered young women even though he had one of his own. He would also say to investigators, I want my kid to have a chance to grow up, you know? She's in a safe space now. She's not going to see any of this. I want her to have a chance to grow up and not have all of this hanging over her head. Keyes told investigators, quote, the things I've done, I don't feel bad about them. I did them for myself. It's better for me to keep them to myself. They're mine. I'm now going to play audio of him describing himself to the FBI.
Right now, there is no one who knows me, or who has ever known me, who knows anything about me, really. They know they're going to tell you something that does not line up with anything I tell you because I'm two different people, basically. And the only person who knows about what I'm telling you, the kind of things I'm telling you, is me.
How long have you been two different people?
Long time. 14 years.
He said that it was in his kind of early 20s, mid-20s, that he really came to terms with who he was, recognizing that he was different from other people and that he had these urges and that there wasn't, he tried to initially blame it on, Satan and religious things and why he was like this and a number of different things. And then he ultimately realized that that's just who he was, and he accepted that. And I think that as he began to do that, it became easier for him to do. He talked about enjoying the fact that he was two different people and really being able to play that off with people, and that people had absolutely no idea what he was doing. He even referenced times where he would be at his job when he was living in Washington, and people would talk about criminals and how stupid they were and how they did this to get caught or that to get caught, and how he enjoyed those kind of conversations because people had no clue what he was doing. Israel Keyes had no remorse at all. He enjoyed what he did. He talked about enjoying what he did. He talked about, had he not been caught, some of his future plans and what he would have done, which included continuing to do what he was doing, continuing to kidnap and murder people. So he had no remorse at all.
When the FBI searched his home, they found his pugs that were well behaved along with a ramp that he built in order for them to get into the backyard. He would tell investigators that he had lots of hobbies, including fishing, boats, hiking, camping, kayaking at Eklutna Lake, and all of the things other Alaskans do. But he was definitely doing things other Alaskans wouldn't be able to wrap their heads around. He would say, quote, you go fishing or out hunting, stalking through the woods, you see somebody through the woods, they don't see you. Sit there and watch them for a while. He also went on about how he wasn't picky about the people he decided to abduct and kill. As long as they were lightweight and easy to dispose of, he was happy. He did say that since becoming a father, he tried his best to avoid hurting children. He also spoke about a retirement plan that included him building a dungeon in his home, and that there were multiple places that he had placed tools along the bank of Eagle River, but he wasn't planning on leaving them there because he doesn't like to litter. He planned on eventually using them. These were found by authorities. I mentioned earlier that he often prepared kits before committing these horrific crimes. I want to list all the items that he had in this murder kit. He had a handgun, silencers, ligatures, ammunition, and garbage bags that he would bury in places he intended to go back to in order to murder someone. These have been found in Alaska, New York, Washington, Wyoming, Texas, and Arizona. During his interrogation, he also revealed that he admired the serial killer Ted Bundy. He told investigators he saw himself in him and would label the serial killer Dennis Rader a wimp because he felt remorse for his killings after the fact. In the spring of 2012, while in court, Keyes jerked forward from his restraints and tried to run out of the courtroom before he was tackled and tasered by U.S. Marshals. There was also another occasion where he was found with a pick-type device made to open handcuffs with a paperclip and dental floss. Because of these incidents, he was escorted by 2 police officers in full restraints each time he was put in his cell. He made it clear that he wanted the death penalty because he had no long-term interest in survival while in prison. I'm now going to play audio of an FBI special agent talking about this.
He wanted the death penalty and he wanted it fast. Speaking generally, that was what he wanted. There were little things along the way that he wanted, he wanted evidence returned to family members and things like that. But big picture, what he wanted to avoid trials, he wanted to avoid publicity and media, he wanted to avoid being taken from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and tried in multiple places, and ultimately he wanted the death penalty, and he wanted it quickly. He didn't want to sit in jail for a long period of time.
Correctional Officer Lauren Jacobson was supposed to be keeping an eye on him as he was the highest profile and valued inmate, but was instead fired for negligent inattention by the Department of Corrections for reading a novel while Keyes was committing a ritualistic suicide only 25 feet away. The FBI was hoping to get more information out of him in order to potentially identify other victims. Keyes was in federal custody but housed at the Anchorage jail on charges of killing Samantha. The Alaska Correctional Officers Association did appeal the decision, saying that he didn't deserve to be fired and should get his job back. The union was locked in a dispute with the Department of Corrections management over multiple issues, including staffing and scheduling. Lauren Jacobson stated that he had been on a sanctioned meal break at the time Keyes committed suicide and followed all of the procedures through the night before his body was found. He felt that the Department of Corrections had no cause to terminate him and that he was the fall guy for the incident. It's worth noting that in July of that same year, there was a makeshift noose found in his cell, which was a sign that he was planning on committing suicide, but no actions were taken to prevent it. Instead, he was put back into the Bravo module, which was a maximum security unit for long-term prisoners that weren't considered a suicide threat. He didn't have a roommate, but his cell faced a metal guard table and included bunk beds. Lauren Jacobson said that he was surprised when he saw Keyes was back in the Bravo module, considering they found the noose previously. Quote, "In the past, when we'd have high-profile people, they'd be in camera cells on the other side of the building. There was also a rumor being spread around that Keyes may have made a deal with the feds that he would tell them more of his story if he could move out of the suicide watch back to the Bravo module." Jacobson also stated on December 1st, 2012, he was assigned to work the overnight security shift in the Bravo unit. He was the lone guard for 15 prisoners and was supposed to do a visual inspection of each cell every half hour, as well as a formal count every 4 hours. Keyes was last seen arranging items in his cell and then getting back into bed around 10:12 p.m. This is when Jacobson left to go on his scheduled meal break, meaning another guard was supposed to take over. A little after Keyes got into bed, he hid under his blankets on the bunk bed, slashed his wrist with a razor blade that had been mistakenly given to him by another correctional officer, and used a makeshift noose to strangle himself. The surveillance footage shows the entire cell from a vantage point of a camera, and movement can be seen until a final jerk at 10:24 p.m. Jacobson returned from his meal break and continued to do his routine checks until his shift was over. According to Jacobson, he hadn't seen the blood pooling on the floor inside of his cell until after midnight. As stated earlier, he had been reading a novel in between checks and had conversations with other guards through an internal phone system, and at one point researched purchasing an airplane online. According to the Department of Corrections, these activities distracted him, making his security checks perfunctory, but according to Jacobson, the cell was dark and Keyes was sleeping under a blanket, so everything looked black and white. Jacobson was fired on December 28th. I'm now going to read what was said to him in his dismissal letter. "You sat at the desk throughout your shift, reading a book, assessing the internet, and engaging in lengthy conversations with coworkers. During this time, the inmate managed to tie a noose around his neck and cut his wrist, resulting in blood in his bunk, on the walls, and blood pooling on the floor. The inmate was dead and remained undetected until the next officer came on shift. The totality of this circumstance and your actions is simply inexcusable and warrants nothing less than a dismissal of employment." The union stated that the state's investigation was flawed and poor management decisions were the cause of this incident because they assigned Keyes to a dimly lit cell and because Jacobson was on break at the time. The union's representative wrote, "Inmate Keyes is dead because one or more people authorized and moved him out of a suicide cell, and because someone then gave him a razor." When speaking on the activities Jacobson did, the union said, "These activities are very common on both day and night shift, but especially on night shift when officers are attempting to remain attentive and awake." Arbitrator Timothy Williams said Keyes was chillingly methodical and clever in completing his suicide, and that Jacobson's work performance was not high quality, but it was not a firing offense according to the Department of Corrections standards. Quote, "The officer did not sit at his desk reading a book while inmate Keyes committed suicide. When Jacobson left for his meal break, inmate Keyes was still up and very much alive, and when he returned, inmate Keyes had completed his efforts at suicide. There are numerous examples where a death of an inmate is not discovered until lights are turned off in the morning and COs on duty were neither disciplined or discharged. There was also a suicide note found under his body that I'm now going to read to you. Where will you go, you clever little worm, if you bleed your host dry? Back in your ride, the night is still young, streetlights push back the black eye-neat rose. Off to the right, a graveyard appears, lines of stones, bodies molder below. Turn away quick. Bob your head to the seat. As straight forward through that stop sign, you roll loaded truck with lights off slams into you broadside. Your flesh smashed as metal explodes. You may have been free. You loved living your life. Fate had its own scheme. Crushed like a bug, you still die. Soon now you'll join those ranks of dead, or your ashes the wind will soon blow. Family and friends will shed a few tears, pretend it's off to heaven you go. But the reality is you were just bones and meat, and with your brain died also your soul. Send the dying to wait for their death in the comfort of retirement homes. Quietly, quickly, say it's for the best. It's best for you so their fate you'll not know. Turn a blind eye back to the screen, soak in your reality shows. Stand in front of your mirror and you preen, in a plastic castle you call home. Land of the free, land of the lie, land of scheme, Americanize. Consume what you don't need, stars you idolize, pursue what you admit is a dream, then it's American die. Get in your big car so you can get to work fast on roads made of dinosaur bones. Punch in on the clock and sit on your ass playing stupid-ass games on your phones. Paper on your wall says you got smarts. The test that you took told you so, but you would still crawl like the vermin you are once your precious power grid's blown. Land of the free, land of the lie, land of the scheme, Americanize. Now that I have you held tight, I will tell you a story. Speak soft in your ear so you know that it's true. You're my love at first sight, and though you're scared to be near me, my words penetrate your thoughts now in an intimate prelude. I looked in your eyes, they were so dark, warm and trusting, as though you had not a worry or care. The more gillis the game, the better potential to fill those pools with your fear. Your face framed in dark curls like a portrait, the sun shone through highlights of red. What color I wonder, and how straight will it turn plastered back with the sweat of your blood. Your wet lips were a promise of secret unspoken, nervous laugh as it burst like a pulse of blood from your throat. There will be no more laughter here. I feel your body tense up, my hand now on your shoulder, your eyes. Forget the lady called Luck. She does not abide near me, for her powers don't extend to those who are dead. My pretty captive butterfly, colorful wings, my hand smears, punishment and tears. Violent metamorphosis, emerge my dark moth princess. Come often and worship on the altar of your flesh. You shudder and try to shrink far from me. I'll have you tied down and begging to become my sweetie. Okay, talk is over, words are placid and weak. Back it with action or it all comes off cheap. Watch close while I work now. Feel the electric shock of my touch. Open your trembling flower or your petals I'll crush. So that was terrifying, and it was really uncomfortable to read. I was literally cringing the whole time and just thinking about what he could have meant by this. There's a lot of different sentences that you can analyze and connect it back to the murders he committed, so if you had to listen to all of that, I am very sorry. There were also 11 blood-painted skulls found on pieces of paper under his bed. The blood was from keys. Remember that it is believed that he killed 11 people, which would make sense if that's what he's trying to show us. One of the pieces of paper also says, "We are one under a skull." I think the scariest part of these pieces is that he cut himself enough to get that much blood onto paper. Thinking about him doing this in his cell is so off-putting to me. I'm now going to play audio from an FBI special agent describing why they believe there are 11 victims.
We believe there are 11 victims total, and that is based primarily on what Keys told us. He was evasive, like you mentioned, he was very evasive at times during interviews, and he told us when we tried to pin him down on a number, he would say it was less than 12. But then there were things that he would say that led us to believe that by less than 12, he simply meant 11. And so he was quick to correct us in interviews if we had something wrong. So there were several times where we just threw out statements like, "You are 11 victims," or things like that, and he didn't correct us. So based on that and some just additional things that he said, we believe the number is 11.
On December 10th, 2012, his mother Heidi and his 4 sisters gathered at his funeral in Deer Park, Washington. The pastor named Jake Gardner began the service by saying he is not in a better place, he is in a place of eternal torment. There is one more thing worth mentioning that is not known widely. According to FBI files and internet archives that will be in the show notes, Israel's daughter had a brother named Keaton Hawkins that was close to Keyes. He actually ended up committing suicide also after Keyes was incarcerated. There are theories that this kid could have been an accomplice, but once again, that is just theorized on the internet. The FBI is currently still looking into Keyes and his travels, as he may have committed more crimes while living in New York since he wasn't too far from Canada. There are also other places that the FBI has placed him at, along with dates if you or anyone you know has any information. I'm going to list those and the contact information. From April 20th, 2005 to April 25th, 2005 in British Columbia, from October 3rd, 2001 to October 31st, 2005 in Belize, from March 1st, 2007 to March 9th, 2007 in Canada, from April 24th, 2007 to May 4th, 2007 in Mexico, and from December 11th, 2008 to December 25th, 2008 in Mexico. There is a memorial placed on a gazebo at Matanuska Lake in Alaska for Samantha and all of the other victims. It reads, "With remembrance and respect, this space is dedicated to the cherished loved ones who were violently taken from their lives and ours. If you or anyone you know has information, please contact 1-800-225-5324, and all of this information will also be available on our Instagram. This was easily one of the hardest ones I've had to research, and it is so sad that there are so many families waiting for justice. As always, all evidence will be available in the show notes. Feel free to follow our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast or my personal at Annalisa. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review as it helps the show so much, and thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you on the next one.